A cold winter morning had dawned over the hunting lodge at Mayerling. Located in the Vienna woods, the Mayerling hunting lodge was just 27 kilometers southwest of the Austrian capital, Vienna. On this morning inside the lodge, Count Joseph Hoyos, Prince Philip of Coburg, and Johann Loschek were panicking. Hoyos and Coburg had come to the hunting lodge on a 2-day hunting trip. The lodge itself belonged to their companion who had invited them to spend 2 days hunting together. Their companion went by the title of Seine Kaiserliche und Königliche Hoheit des durchlauchtigsten Herrn Kronprinzen Erzherzog Rudolf. Simply put, it was the Crown Prince Rudolf, heir to Austria-Hungary. The third man panicking was Rudolf's valet. Earlier that morning while walking outside, Loschek had heard 2 gunshots. After knocking on his master's bedroom door, there was simply no sign of life coming in return. The men were unsure how to act, but Hoyos and Coburg came to the decision that it was time to break down the door using force. Loschek, holding an axe, smashed in one of the door panels. He peeked inside. The air was thick. Philip and Hoyos were breathless. The prince's valet, Loschek, sighed, and he began to explain what he could see. Inside lay the Crown Prince in bed, lifeless. He was bent over the edge of the bed with a large pool of blood around him. But that was not all. Laying on the left side of the bed, covered in blood, was a 17-year-old girl. The girl was Baroness Mary Vetsera. She had accompanied Prince Rudolf in secret to the lodge. The men were in dismay. The heir to one of Europe's great superpowers was no more. It was the birth of a scandal. Millions of newspaper readers throughout the empire and across the world would soon learn of this small hunting lodge in Mayerling. But what a large amount of them would read about the events that took place there would be far from the truth. Thanks to attempted cover-ups and censorship, nothing short of fake news, conspiracy, and speculation would follow. The true events in Mayerling are unfolded through a web of characters, the exploration of which will help us have a clear view of the events that took place. The first steps towards Mary Vetsera and Crown Prince Rudolf's violent end took place 9 months and 18 days before the 2 of them would be found dead. On this spring day, Mary was attending a horse race at Vienna's Freudenau racecourse. At some point during the day, while prancing around, she looked up at the grandstand and spotted the Crown Prince Rudolf sitting in the royal box. He was dully watching the races. This was the first time Mary had ever seen the Crown Prince with her own eyes, and this was the moment of awakening for Mary's obsession with Rudolf. Like many girls, she started collecting newspaper articles and photos of him. Mary Vetsera was born on the 19th of March, 1871. Her father was a diplomat and usually worked overseas. Because of this, Mary was raised predominantly by her mother Helena. Mary also had a strong relationship with one of her uncles, Alexander Balzazi. Mary's father, Alwin, had died in 1887. Since 1880, the Vetsera family lived in a palace in Vienna's 3rd district on the Salesianer Gasse. Mary's education was directed towards her future in Viennese society. Mary's mother Helena was happy to put her beloved daughter in the spotlight in order to get her close to the Viennese court and to introduce her into aristocratic society. At the age of 13, Mary was the cover girl in the Wiener Salonblatt. The article was about her attendance at a Viennese children's ball. In 1885, a second article was published, and in July 1877 came a third article. This article reports that Mary had grown from a child into a charming lady. And it was true. Her youthful beauty and elegance had earned her attention at all the societal events of Vienna. She could float, sort of helplessly, in a flamboyance that was unforced and thus doubly as magnetic. She knew how to stand out. Ambition had been bred into Mary Vetsera's genes. By 1888, Mary was just 17 years old. Over the following summer, Mary left Vienna with the Vetsera family on a number of trips both in and out of Austria-Hungary. And it was during that summer that the Crown Prince Rudolf proposed an idea to his mistress, Mitzi Kasper. He asked if she would care to join him in shooting himself. Mitzi had laughed the idea off and quickly changed the topic. She was, however, concerned enough to inform Vienna's chief of police, Franz Krals, about what Rudolf had proposed. Why was the Crown Prince acting so unbelievably morbid? Rudolf was born on the 21st of August 1858 and was the only son of Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elizabeth. Before his baptism, he would be awarded the military title of Oberst, becoming colonel of the K&K Infantry Regiment No. 19. Rudolf's restless mother Elizabeth was rarely present during his upbringing, and Rudolf only ever saw his father on official occasions. In 1864, Count Leopold Grandecor became his educator and tried to harden the sensitive boy with harsh militant teaching methods. He was therefore replaced in 1865 by Count Joseph Latour. Latour gained Rudolf's trust and became a sort of father figure for young Rudolf. From this point, Rudolf received a liberal education and developed strong empathy for the minorities of the monarchy. Writing at the age of 15, the many poor rightly see their enemy in the few who consume their substance. He found no connection to his father apart from the occasional hunting trip, and Rudolf grew critical of his father's conservative politics and wanted change. But Rudolf's father had a military career planned for him. At the age of 18, Rudolf's teacher Latour would be replaced by Karl Bombellis. He would become Rudolf's chief court steward. By this point, Rudolf was one of the most sought-after young personalities of his time, but despite the almost godlike admiration he received as heir apparent, Rudolf had no real power to make meaningful change. By the end of July 1878, he was relocated to Prague. In Prague, he served the K&K Infantry Regiment No. 36 as their colonel, which is where he received an infantry officer's service revolver. It was a System Gasser Kropatschek, caliber 9mm. In March 1880, he went to Brussels to look for a bride, and fell for Princess Stephanie, daughter of the Belgian King Leopold II. In 1881, Rudolf began to publish articles critical of the current leadership and government anonymously in the newspaper Neues Wiener Tagblatt. In 1882, Rudolf was promoted to Lieutenant Field Marshal, forcing him further into an unwanted position in the military. By 1886, Rudolf reportedly became seriously ill with gonorrhea. To help with the pain, he began to take morphine and consumed alcohol, usually mixing cognac with champagne. He began to talk about his suicidal thoughts, and took consolidation in many women. He did, however, have a long-form relationship with Mitzi Kasper, but Rudolf found nothing more in common with his wife Stephanie. They lived separate lives. He did, however, manage to infect her with gonorrhea. Rudolf grew resentful, but he had to keep on smiling. By 1888, he seemed sick and suffered from mood swings. To cope with nervous breakdowns, he consumed more drugs and became ever more morbid than before. At the beginning of September, Mary and her mother returned to Vienna after a summer of travelling. Mary wrote to her closest friend and ex-piano teacher Hermione Tobis, "Don't you believe for a moment that I've forgotten him. I only love him more deeply." Mary was of course referring to her secret love of the Crown Prince. A big day for Viennese society. The new K&K Court Theatre was opened by Kaiser Franz Joseph. Prince Rudolf was in attendance with his wife Stephanie. Mary was also a guest at the opening alongside her mother Helena. It is not certain whether Mary had seen Rudolf on this evening. Another horse race took place at the Freudenau racecourse. Mary attended so that she could catch another glimpse of Prince Rudolf. Sometime after this race, Mary wrote a letter to Prince Rudolf proposing a meeting between the two of them. After almost 4 weeks of waiting, Mary finally receives an answer from Crown Prince Rudolf, and it was arranged for Mary to meet the Crown Prince for the first time at his apartment in the Hofburg. But who brought the letter to the prince in the first place? Introducing Marie Larisch. Larisch was the daughter of Duke Ludwig, and Duke Ludwig was the brother of the Austrian Empress Elizabeth. That made Larisch the niece of Empress Elizabeth and the cousin of the Crown Prince Rudolf. She got on well with her auntie Elizabeth and visited Vienna often. While in Vienna, Larisch would stay at the Grand Hotel. Larisch was a close friend of the Vetsera family as well, and in 1888 she became a close confidant of Mary. Mary let herself vent about her feelings to Larisch, including those about the Crown Prince Rudolf. You see, Mary's mother Helena would never just let Mary out of her house on her own, and Mary had to keep her love of the Crown Prince 13 years her age a secret from her mother. So Larisch could solve these problems. Being a friend of Mary's mother Helena, Helena would be happy to let her daughter Mary out of the house with Larisch. And Larisch could also use her family connections to make contact with the Crown Prince possible. In the morning, Larisch picked Mary up at the Vetsera Palace with the excuse to take care of some commissions. Larisch and Mary then rode into the city together and went to the photo studio Adele. There they had their portrait taken together. For him, of course, Mary noted in a letter to her friend Hermione. The two of them then rode to the backside of the Grand Hotel, which is where Rudolf's carriage driver, Josef Bratfisch, was waiting for them in his carriage. They then rode with Josef Bratfisch to the Hofburg, or the Imperial Palace, where they entered through a side entrance known as the Iron Gate. There they were met by one of Rudolf's servants, who led them through the Iron Gate and up onto the roof of the Augustiner corridor, which they then discreetly walked across and went back inside to the main building. A brief walk through some dark corridors took them into Rudolf's quarters, which is where Rudolf was waiting for them. Larisch introduced Mary to him, and a lively conversation took place. Mary would later note in a letter to her friend Hermione, then Rudolf went with Larisch to another room. I looked around me. On his desk was a revolver and a skull. I picked up the skull, took it between my hands and looked at it from all sides. Suddenly, Rudolf came in and took it from me with deep apprehension. When I said that I wasn't afraid, he smiled. The introduction was complete. As we were leaving, Rudolf took us through a dark hall and up a staircase and said to Larisch, I ask you bring her to me again. And with that, the ladies left the Hofburg together. 3 months of meetings would then follow. The meetings were almost always arranged by Larisch, and despite Larisch's close friendship with Mary's mother Helena, Helena would be completely in the dark about the relationship of her daughter and the Crown Prince, and by the time she found out, it would be too late. For the rest of November, however, life went on and Mary and Rudolf didn't see each other. Rudolf and Mary have now met each other, but it is certain that nothing more than a conversation took place. It would not be until December that the two of them could finally meet alone. For in December of the year 1888, the Viennese court opera would present Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen. The 4-part opera would be presented over 4 nights, beginning on the 11th of December and ending on the 21st of December. The performances usually lasted until midnight. Mary used the excuse of not enjoying Wagner to convince her mother, Helena, to let her stay home alone. Mary would indeed be allowed to stay home alone for all 4 performances. This was her first opportunity to see Rudolf again, and everything had been arranged in the weeks prior. So once Mary's family had shuffled off to the opera, Mary snuck out of the palace, went to the nearby Marokkanergasse and met Rudolf's carriage driver Josef Bratfisch just as they had planned. He drove her once again to the Hofburg, letting her out at the same side entrance they had used before. This would be the first meeting between Rudolf and Mary when they were completely alone. The meeting lasted about 2 hours before Mary had to leave. She went back the same way she came, being driven from Bratfisch back to the Vetsera Palace, where she could sneak back inside before her family came home and knew any better. This exact same process took place on the 14th, 17th and 21st of December as Mary was home alone, not going to the opera with her family. On the 13th of January, a fifth meeting took place. This time, Rudolf gifted Mary an iron ring with the inscription ILVIDT. It meant in Liebe vereint bis in den Tod, united in love until death. He also gifted Mary a locket. Inside was a cloth with Rudolf's stained blood. According to the Vetsera palace's maid Agnes, who was also Mary's close friend, Mary had come home very excited, but had said that maybe it was better had she not gone, for now she no longer belongs to herself, but to him alone. We both lost our heads, and I became a woman. Now we belong to each other with body and soul. On the 15th of January, Mary and Agnes went to a jewellery store called Rodeck together. Mary purchased a golden cigarette case as a gift for Rudolf. She ordered to have the words engraved, Dank dem glücklichen Geschichte, thanks to good fortune. Mary paid for the golden cigarette case up front, using 300 gulden she borrowed from her uncle and a further 180 gulden from Larisch. 4 days later, Mary met with Rudolf and gifted him the golden cigarette case before rushing back home so that her mother Helena wouldn't know anything about it. On the 26th, Rudolf began making plans for a hunting trip on the 29th at his lodge in Mayerling. He extended formal invitations to his friend Count Hoyos and to his brother-in-law Prince Philip von Coburg. That same day, Mary's mother Helena began to suspect that Mary may have contact with the Crown Prince. First, she questions the maid Agnes, and despite Agnes knowing almost everything, she only admitted to knowing about the golden cigarette case. With this, Helena questioned Mary, and after a lot of threats, Mary admits to have bought the cigarette case for Rudolf, but she claimed to have sent it anonymously to him. Helena calls Mary crazy. What was a 17-year-old girl doing sending gifts to a married crown prince? Helena now knew that Mary was sending her crush a gift, but she knew nothing more. Helena had no idea that the affair between Rudolf and Mary was already in full swing. The next day, Larisch visited the Vetsera palace and talked with Helena. Because Larisch is the crown prince's cousin, Helena told everything about the golden cigarette case that her daughter had sent to the crown prince. Larisch calmed Helena by telling her that her cousin the prince probably has no idea from whom the cigarette case was from. Larisch then said that she would take Mary back to the jewellery store tomorrow and have the receipt rewritten onto her family name. Helena agreed, and with these lies, she was off their scent. That evening, Mary joined her mother in attending a ball at the German embassy just down the road, which was celebrating the birthday of the German emperor. Prince Rudolf and his wife Princess Stephanie were both present. During the ball, Mary spoke to Rudolf's friend Hoyos. Hoyos mentioned to Mary that he has plans to go to the Vienna woods on another hunting trip with his friend Rudolf tomorrow. Afterwards, a little scandal took place. As Princess Stephanie was walking through the hall and received curtsies and bows from those surrounding her, Mary stood still and upright, staring directly at Rudolf's wife in the eyes. Rudolf left the ball at around 10:30 p.m, returning to the Habsburg. 2 hours later, the Vetsera family left the ball. Around the same time, Rudolf left the Habsburg and went to visit his lover Mitzi Kaspar in Vienna's 4th district. Shortly thereafter, Mary showed up at the Grand Hotel. She went to see Larisch and said that her mother is furious at her for her behaviour in front of the princess at the ball. Larisch brought Mary back to her mother at the Vetsera palace. Larisch chatted with Helena, and she speculated that maybe there was something happening between her daughter and the crown prince. But Larisch once again reassured Helena that it couldn't be serious and that she will speak to the crown prince herself. Of course, all of this was a lie. Larisch knew everything at this point. At 3 a.m, while saying farewell to his lover Mitzi Kaspar, Rudolf made a cross on her forehead with his finger. He also mentioned to her that night about how shooting himself would be required for his honor. At 9 a.m. the next day, Rudolf met with his father Franz Josef. It is not known exactly what the meeting was for, but it is speculated that it was about a letter from the Pope. Months ago, Rudolf had sent the Pope a letter asking for a divorce with his wife Stephanie. The Pope had declined, but the letter he wrote back was not addressed to Rudolf, but rather directly to his father, Emperor Franz Joseph. The meeting ended with a loud argument between father and son. At 10 AM, Larisch rode to the Vetsera palace to take Mary out. By 10:30 AM, they were headed directly to the Hofburg. Remember, Mary's mother Helena had been tricked. She believed that her daughter was being taken to the jewelry store to have the receipt of the cigarette case rewritten on Larisch's name. At 10:50 AM, Larisch and Mary had arrived at the Hofburg. Rudolf received Mary in his room, but Larisch was told to wait outside. 5 minutes later, Mary departed the Hofburg with Rudolf's driver. They headed southwest and pulled up at the Gasthaus Rotterstattel, where they would wait for Crown Prince Rudolf. Meanwhile, Rudolf came to Larisch and told her to construct a lie that Mary had run away at the jewelry store. Rudolf gave Larisch 500 gulden to bribe her carriage driver into the lie. At 11:30, Rudolf departed the Hofburg. He rode southwest to the Gasthaus Rotterstattel, where he met Bratfisch and Mary. They then rode further to Mayerling. By 3:30 PM, the carriage had arrived in Mayerling. Rudolf got off at the lodge's guest house and walked from there to the east gate, where he was greeted from the lodge's groundkeeper, Zwerger. Zwerger noticed a revolver in the pocket of Rudolf's coat. The driver Bratfisch then took the carriage through the southern gate and let Mary depart directly in the courtyard, where the valet Loschek had been waiting, and she went directly into Rudolf's room. The Crown Prince went against protocol that day and left the telegraph office in Mayerling unarmed. Back in Vienna, Larisch had returned to the Vetsera palace and told the constructed lie to Helena about how Mary had run away when they were at the jewelry store. Helena immediately told her brother Alexander Balzazzi. At midday, Larisch entered the Vienna police quarters and informed Chief of Police Franz Kraltz of the disappearance of Mary Vetsera. She gave a written statement to the police in which she kept to the lie of Mary running away. Larisch's carriage driver was also questioned, and thanks to the handsome 500 gulden bribe, he was also in on the lie. At 7 PM that evening, Helena and her brother Balzazzi met with the Chief of Police Kraltz. They asked him for help. Mary's uncle explained that he believes Mary could possibly be with the Crown Prince. Chief of Police Krauss already knew that the prince was at the lodge in Mayerling, but as the lodge was crown property, the police could only investigate with permission from the emperor. He told Helena to not file a missing persons report because the media will report on it. She should wait. At 6 AM on the 29th of January, Hoyos and Coburg took a train from Vienna to nearby Baden. They departed the train and then took a carriage leading them to the hunting lodge. Arriving at the lodge at 8:10, Coburg noticed that all the shutters on the windows facing the street entrances were closed, giving him the impression that nobody was home. The hunting guests entered the main part of the lodge and waited in the billiard room for Rudolf. 20 minutes later, Rudolf came to them and they ate breakfast together. Rudolf explained that because he has caught a cold, he will not take part in the planned hunt today. Instead, Rudolf would secretly stay with Mary for the day in his room, while Coburg and Hoyos go hunting together, unaware of Mary's presence at the lodge. Back in Vienna at 9 AM, Mary's mother and uncle went to see the chief of police in Vienna. They gave him a picture of Mary. It was the same photo that Larisch and Mary had taken together. The chief of police, Franz Kraltz, once again explained that he does not have permission to search on crown-owned land. He also convinced Helena to wait one more day before filing a missing persons report. At midday, Kraltz informed his superior, the Prime Minister Eduard Taffer. Taffer instructed Kraltz not to proceed for the time being. Back at the hunting lodge at 3 PM, Coburg had come back from hunting and joined Rudolf for tea. That evening, there was a planned dinner at 6 PM back in Vienna, where both Rudolf and Coburg were expected to attend. Rudolf informed Coburg that he was sick and not going to come. Coburg then left the hunting lodge and headed to Vienna. At 5 p.m, Helena visited Prime Minister Taffa to intervene personally. Taffa explained that there was no evidence that the prince had taken Mary. The Prime Minister reassured Helena by saying that the Crown Prince will show up to the family dinner in the Hofburg tonight, and then they will know more. He did not know of Rudolf's cancellation. Sometime afterwards, Taffa met with Chief of Police Karls. The Prime Minister gave Karls a task. He is to send agents to Mayerling and into the Hofburg to finally find out if the young lady is with the prince or not. Karls gave the case to Chief Inspector Jurka. He then sent a dispatch to Agent Dr. Florian Meissner, who had Rudolf under meticulous surveillance for years. At 5:30 p.m, Hoyos returned from hunting and entered into his quarters in the Mayerlinghof. Dinner was planned for 7 p.m. with Rudolf. As planned, at 7 p.m, Hoyos and Rudolf met in Rudolf's quarters and ate dinner together. By 9 p.m, Rudolf excused himself and returned to his room to attend to his runny nose. Hoyos returns to his guest room in the Mayerlinghof. Rudolf and Mary then re-entered the billiard room and began to have a chat with the carriage driver Bratfisch. The renowned singer, Bratfisch, sang some songs for them. Afterwards, Rudolf and Mary returned to their room. Rudolf's valet, Loschek, whose room was adjacent Rudolf's, could hear them talking the whole night, but he could not understand exactly what they were saying. That evening, Rudolf wrote a number of farewell letters, most notably to his wife. "You are freed from my presence and my torment. Be happy in your own way. I go calmly into death, which alone can preserve my good name." In another letter, he wrote, "I must die. It is the only way, at least the only way for a gentleman, to leave this world." On the bedside table, he left a note with instructions to his valet Loschek. "Fetch a clergyman and let us be buried together in a single grave. Deliver the valuables of my dear Mary, along with a letter from her to Mary's mother." Mary's letters are particularly tragic. "Dear mother, forgive me for what I have done. I could not resist love. I am happier in death than in life. Your Mary." At 6:15 in the morning, Rudolf entered the room of his valet Loschek. He was fully dressed and instructed Loschek to prepare the horses and carriage for departure. Before returning to his room, Rudolf told Loschek to wake him at 7:30 so that he may get ready for breakfast. At approximately 6:30 a.m, Crown Prince Rudolf placed his 9mm Systemgasse Koppercheck revolver on Mary's left temple and pulled the trigger. The bullet pierced into her skull from the left and came out the right side, sticking into the bedside table. Rudolf laid Mary onto the left side of the bed. He sat himself down on the opposite side of the bed and shot himself in the face. Loschek ran to Rudolf's room. He could smell gunpowder in the air. He discovered that the room to Rudolf's room was locked. After knocking and knocking, he received no response. Firstly, he informed the groundskeeper Zwerger. Zwerger immediately checked the second door that can be reached from a spiral staircase. It was also locked. At 7:50 a.m, Zwerger went to the Mayerlinghof to inform Hoyos about the possible tragedy. They both rush up to the hunting lodge. Loschek informs Hoyos of the shots and that Rudolf was not alone, but also with a young baroness of the name Vetsera. Rudolf's brother-in-law, Coburg, had spent the night in Vienna and was expected to arrive at 8:10 a.m. Sure enough, at 8:10 he arrived in Mayerling. Under Coburg's orders, Loschek used an axe to break a hole into the door. Loschek reached inside and unlocked the door and supposedly entered Rudolf's room alone. Loschek came back to the others and made the claim that Rudolf had been killed from cyanide poisoning. Loschek had a telegram dispatched to court Dr. Wiederhofer in Vienna, telling him that the Crown Prince was sickly ill. At 8:37 a.m, Hoyos left the others at the hunting lodge and headed with Rudolf's carriage driver to the train station in Baden. Hoyos had the express train from Trieste to Vienna take an emergency stop in Baden so that he could reach Vienna faster. Hoyos arrived at the Hofburg at 10:11 a.m. He informed the chief court steward of Crown Prince Rudolf, Count Bombelis, about the tragedy in Mayerling. They then gathered with Baron Nopska and Field Marshal Count Eduard Parr. These four men decided that it would be better to tell Rudolf's mother, Empress Elizabeth, first of the news, and then Elizabeth could tell her husband, Franz Josef. Around midday, Hoyos was summoned by the Emperor to find out closer details about the death of his son. Hoyos told the emperor that his son had been killed from cyanide poisoning. Upon the breaking of the news, Prime Minister Taffa informed the chief court-martial, Anton von Temmerin, to keep the news a secret. A royal committee was hushily formed by the office of the chief court-martial of the imperial court. The committee, made up of 7 men, without delay departed to Mayerling to ascertain more precise details. Back in Mayerling, Dr. Wiedehoff had entered the hunting lodge at midday. He was informed by Coburg of what had happened, and he began to examine the corpses. He came to the firm conclusion that Rudolf shot Mary and afterwards shot himself. Shortly afterwards, the royal committee had arrived in Mayerling. The committee evaluated the room. The female body was officially identified as Mary Vetsera. A revolver and a hand mirror lay close to Rudolf. His skull cap had been completely blown open, making his face unrecognizable. Dr. Wiedehofer declared to the royal committee that from his examination, no poisoning took place, but rather a murder and suicide with a gun. By 1 p.m, Chief of Police Karls would be informed. It was decided to hide Mary's involvement to avoid a scandal. Prime Minister Taffa issued orders to frame Mary's death as a suicide and to have her body buried as soon as possible. When Dr. Wiedehofer returned to Vienna, he personally informed the emperor that Rudolf had not died from cyanide poisoning, but rather Rudolf had shot Mary and then himself. At 7:25 in the evening, Rudolf's body was laid in a coffin and brought to Baden train station. Arriving at Baden train station, the coffin was loaded into a train wagon and then driven to Vienna's Südbahnhof train station. From there, the body was taken to the Habsburg. And the rumours started to spread. Some newspapers claiming that Rudolf had died from a heart attack. We will now break the timeline and go back to the start of the day to explore what happened to Mary's mother. In the morning, Helena went to the police department. She now wanted to publish a missing persons report. She was told by the office worker there that she should wait. By the way, by this point, Helena's friend and Rudolf's cousin, the one responsible for Mary's disappearance, Larisch, had left Vienna. Helena got fed up of waiting and decided that she would go directly to the prince's mother, Empress Elizabeth. She goes to the Hofburg and is told by the court lady-in-waiting that she must wait for a spontaneous meeting because the empress is busy. After waiting and waiting, the Empress Elizabeth finally comes to Helena. Empress Elizabeth informed Helena about the horrible news with the cold words, "Your daughter is dead." The chief court steward Bombellis went to Helena's brother-in-law's house. George Stokow, Mary's uncle, was married to Helena's sister. Bombellis informed Stokow of the death of his niece Mary. He explained the falsehood that Mary had poisoned the crown prince with cyanide. Bombellis told Stokow that he is to go to Mayerling and have the body buried discreetly as soon as possible. Almost as soon as Bombellis left, Helena arrived to her brother-in-law. Stokow explained the situation and told Helena to allow him to take power of attorney over the family. They then went to Helena's palace, where her brother Alexander Balzazzi was waiting. They informed him of the horrible news, and just a short time later, the general adjudicant of the emperor, Graf Paar, showed up at their palace. Paar repeated the falsehood once more, telling the entire family that their very own daughter, Mary Vetsera, had poisoned the crown prince and then killed herself. Paar announced that Mary's mother Helena is to leave Vienna today, as it is not safe for her. Helena followed these orders and took the night train to Venice. As Helena departed Vienna, Stokow had arrived at the hunting lodge in Mayerling. The lodge was surrounded by troops and police agents. He was denied entrance into the lodge. While asking around, however, he got the information that Mary and Rudolf did not die from poison, but likely from a gunshot. That night, while on the train to Venice, Helena's intuition kicked in. She exited the train before it could leave Austria and waited at the station for the next train back to Vienna. The mother knew deep inside that her daughter could not be responsible for the murder of the crown prince. On the morning of the 31st of January, Mary's body was still at the hunting lodge. At 9 a.m, Prime Minister Taffa, Chief of Police Karls, and Rudolf's court steward Bombellis all met together and decided how they are going to remove Mary's body. They devised a plan, and Bombellis went to Stockau and gave him new orders. Mary is to be buried in the Heiligenkreuz cemetery, which is about 5 kilometers away from Mayerling. At 10 a.m., Helena arrived back in Vienna and finally received the news that her daughter Mary did not poison Rudolf. She then had to agree with the decision to let Mary be buried in Heiligenkreuz. At midday, Bombellis ordered Court Secretary Dr. Slatin and Dr. Achenthaler to go to Mayerling and oversee the burial of Mary's corpse. They needed approval from the district administration, so first they went to Baden and met with District Governor Osser, who had already been advised and prepared a document requesting permission to bury Mary tonight. Meanwhile, 2 police agents, Agent Habsburg and Agent Georg, were dispatched to Heiligenkreuz to assist in the burial. At 4:40 p.m, the agents dispatched a telegram to their boss. Approval for the burial granted. The coffin will be made in the Abbey's carpentry workshop. Meanwhile, the representatives of the Vetsera family had arrived in Mayerling. At 7:30 p.m, Dr. Achenthaler and Court Secretary Dr. Slatin arrive. The 4 men go inside. Mary's relatives identified her body. The body was cleaned and dressed, and now it was to be discreetly transported to the Abbey cemetery in Heiligenkreuz. Stockau, Achenthaler and Zwerger carry Mary to a carriage that was waiting at the lodge door. Shortly after 9:30 p.m, they depart on the way to Heiligenkreuz. Mary's body was sat upright in the carriage between her 2 relatives, so it looked like she was a living person sitting down. Her uncle Baltazzi noted how exhausting it was to hold Mary up straight. They arrive at the cemetery at around midnight. Agents Gorup and Habsburg help Stockau and Baltazzi lift the body out of the carriage, and they carry it through the cold to the mortuary. All the men were ready to finish the job, but they were stopped by the weather. The 2 grave diggers found the ground so frosty that it was impossible to finish digging the grave. They would spend the night in Heiligenkreuz. By 9 a.m. the next day, the frost had cleared and the digging of the grave was finished. The burial took place by the cemetery wall in the so-called suicide corner. Mary's relatives Stockau and Baltazzi were present alongside the 2 police agents. The 17-year-old aristocratic girl, Mary Vetsera, now lay under the cold ground in an unmarked grave. At 4 p.m. on the 5th of February, church bells rang out across Vienna as Rudolf's funeral processions began. His body was carried from the Hofburg to the Kapuzinergruft, where he would be laid to rest amongst his Habsburg forebearers. Rudolf's mother Elizabeth and his wife Stephanie did not even take part in the procession. So it was that Rudolf's father, Franz Josef, took his knee alone before his son's tomb and broke into tears. A 3-month-long nationwide mourning was ordered. Larisch had returned to Vienna to take part in the funeral of Crown Prince Rudolf. She stayed, as usual, in the Grand Hotel. Stockau visited her in the hotel and made strong accusations which could not be denied. It turns out Larisch had been in financial difficulties and was receiving money from Crown Prince Rudolf for organising the meetings between Mary and him. The once favourite niece of Empress Elizabeth fell into dishonour and had to leave Vienna for good. Helena's life in Vienna was turned on its head after her daughter's death. Helena was accused by the Viennese court that she had arranged the meetings between Mary and Rudolf. Helena had a grave erected for Mary in the same cemetery she was buried and moved her body into a new coffin. Helena also had a chapel erected in the cemetery in memory of not just Mary, but another one of her dead children, Ladislaus, who at the age of 16 in 1881 died tragically in a fire at one of the Viennese theatres. Helena fell into disgrace, lost her fortune to inflation and died in 1925, outliving all of her children. During World War II, occupying Russian troops smashed into Mary's grave and opened her coffin while on the search for loot. She would eventually be given a new coffin, but it would not be the last time her grave was opened. In July 1991, a furniture salesman opened Mary's coffin and stole her remains. His motive was to solve the mystery. Had Mary indeed been shot by Rudolf or not? He had the bones examined by medical officials without informing them that the body was that of Mary Vetsera. The details brought to light by the robbery of Mary's grave did indeed provide crucial evidence to the case not known before 1991. Crown Prince Rudolf had been discussing suicide long before Mary came into his life. Rudolf never got affection from his parents and received a strict military education that simply did not fit to his personality. Later in life, the gap of missing affection could never be filled from a single woman, including his wife, so Rudolf had a string of affairs. Now, affairs were not uncommon in a political marriage like one of Rudolf and Stephanie, but the relationship between Rudolf and his wife deteriorated to a notably low level. The same could be said about Rudolf's relationship with his father. He became sick in the head, suffering from depression and nervous breakdowns. He also suffered physically with gonorrhea. To help, he took drugs and alcohol. He wanted to die, but he couldn't seem to do it on his own. Or better said, he wanted to feel he was not departing life on his own. Rudolf took advantage of Mary's naivety to achieve this. The 17-year-old Mary Vetsera was naive and unexperienced. It is important to not overlook, however, just how much Mary was in love with the Crown Prince. Her letters are simple proof of her undying love of him. The love was at high stakes though. Rudolf was married, and Mary was not from a family that would be seen by Viennese society as fitting for such an activity with the prince. Thus, in the case of the affair becoming public, Mary and her mother could fall from grace. And how would her mother punish her for that? Mary was trapped between her desires for an imagined life with the Crown Prince and the haphazard nature of the affair. The combination of intense love and the impossibility of a life together led Mary to naively follow Prince Rudolf to Mayerling and let herself be murdered by the prince. Her letters prove that she agreed to let the Crown Prince shoot her. Mayerling has become an emblematic tale, representing underlying issues beneath the facade of the ostentation and luster of the Austrian monarchy. If we are to zoom out, there is actually a substantial list of prominent Austrians who took their own life in and around Vienna during this period. These were a few of the men for whom Vienna, the city of dreams, had become a city of nightmares past further bearing. To these few men belongs the Crown Prince Rudolf. In addition, he carries the responsibility, despite her own consent, of the murder of Mary Vetsera.